Hey students, it's Mrs. T again, and this is another lesson in cultural geography class. And today we're going to talk about thinking geographically, because we probably have to morph the way we think just a little bit because we have been trained in order to think historically most often. It's been my experience anyways with students who are new to cultural geography. A lot of times in our instructional background, like when we've been in classes before, we are focused a lot on what has happened in the past, who did those things, sometimes how does it trickle down and affect the little people, not just the important people who did the big things. And we usually focus on that and neglect a little bit, it's been my observation, we neglect a little bit asking the question why of where those particular things happened. And so that's a key question in geography class. Why did something happen where it happened? So we're in the middle of chapter 1. We should probably finish up chapter 1 with the next 4 or 5 video lessons, short video lessons. And one of the things that it talks about in chapter 1 is that even though this is a human geography class, we have to understand physical geography in order to understand how human beings interact with the environment and create cultural landscapes. So a landscape, of course, is, mountains and streams and trees and anything that we can describe in the physical environment for, characteristics of a place. However, human beings make an imprint on those places as we live out our lives and develop our norms and develop society and culture and habits. And so cultural landscapes that's a word that defines or refers to the way that people make an imprint on the physical environment and use the why of where something originated. Why did it come from that particular place and time? So we do want to know the history also, but we expand a little bit more than what history wants to know. And we can look at present. We don't have to look at the past. We can predict things for the future and all that kind of stuff in cultural geography class. So some of these concepts that are on the board behind me are just basic guidelines for me to be able to walk you through this introductory discussion about thinking geographically. These are some main concepts that we're going to go into more in depth in future discussions. So we're going to look at cultural landscapes all over the world. We're going to look at hearths, cultural hearths. A hearth, you might know this word more commonly as something that's like the area in front of the fireplace where you can have your fireplace tools and stuff like that. That's a hearth, where a fire is, where a fire starts, right? And it confines that fire. But when we talk about a cultural hearth, it's the origination point. Where did a particular type of cultural phenomenon, behavioral trait, where did these particular types of traits originate? Baseball, for instance, where did that originate? The religion of Islam is an example of that your book uses. So we can look at religions as cultural traits, foodways as cultural traits. Where's the first hot dog, and where's the best pizza, and did it really come from Italy, or is it from here or there? We have all these stories about our past, and there's a why of where in those particular things. We have foods, for instance, that we call things like buffalo wings. Well, what's a buffalo mean? It's not referring to an animal, it's referring to a place. And so these kinds of hearths, and these are some kind of silly examples that I've given you, but we can talk about cultural hearths as the origination point for that particular behavioral trait that marks an entire cultural group or entire population. And diffusion is a key word that refers to the way that those particular cultural traits are transmitted from that hearth and spread out to other aspects, other places within a cultural landscape, other cultural groups entirely. There's a section in chapter 1 that talks about how the company McDonald's, they have to know a lot about the different cultural ideas in people's heads when they move from one society to the next. They focus a short bit in your textbook about opening a McDonald's in India, for instance, where beef is taboo. And so think about how many menu items in the United States on the McDonald's menu are beef, right? Or at least partially beef. And so they can't sell that India, for instance, a hot dog, which is something that probably a lot of us enjoy, unless you're vegan or vegetarian or something. A hot dog is typically pork. And if you're in an Islamic state or in a culture that has Islam as the dominant religion, dogs are haram, and so is pork. And so you can't even call it a hot dog if it's going to be an edible item, and you certainly can't use pork as an ingredient. And so there's all kinds of different why of where that are answered not only because of the physical environment, but maybe because of cultural features. And these hearths are the birthplace of a cultural feature that can then spread through diffusion, contact with others, movement of ideas and things and people and goods and all this kind of stuff from one place to the next in the environment. So you hear me focusing on words like human environment interaction, movement, place, location, region. There are some, these are key words in thinking geographically. And in the next few videos that we're going to watch, we are going to look into these concepts of movement and region and human environmental interaction, location and place. Mr. Help is what we call them. They are the themes of geography. And so when we are trying to focus on the question why of where something happened or will happen or we predict it will be this way, those Mr. Help themes of geography, it's really important to understand how human interaction with geographic features, human descriptions of physical places and how we create cultural landscapes out of those physical places. It's important to understand these kinds of things and kind of maybe switch our thinking a little bit less from the history stuff that maybe was we really focused on it in the past. Now we have to ask why of where. This is our key question. Another thing that you're going to see in the next few videos that'll finish out our discussion of chapter 1 are about maps and, I have mental maps and map maps. Okay, so let's start with the map maps. So maps, of course, are something that you probably thought was, geography is going to be just full of this. And yes, we're going to have maps every single time we have a lesson. We're going to talk about maps or point to maps or refer to maps. So certainly maps are a way that geographers can plot in a visual format where something is, maybe where diffusion happens, for instance. I took a class on food history and geography, and it talked about the slave trade, the African slave trade in the United States. The slave trade happened all over the world in a variety of forms, but with African slaves being brought and sold in the United States, many brought seeds with them for certain crops that are now staples maybe in Southern cuisine, like collard greens, for instance. Those are native to Africa that are now they just thrive in the South, right? And maybe it's one of our favorite side dishes for a typical soul food dinner, right? So these kinds of things can be plotted. Where did this come from? How did the diffusion take place? And where did it make a mark on the cultural landscape? And so maps, most often when we use them as part of our daily lives, it's for navigation. And we're going to look at the Mercator projection in a future video and talk about the distortions that are in those maps, because if a map focuses on just navigation or just direction, you go north or south or east or west, then when you take a curved surface and try to make it flat, there's distortions there. And so we'll look at some of those. It's important for geographers to understand that maps are used to depict different things at different times, and therefore maps are gonna look different based on what we're trying to depict, the factual information that we are trying to mark on the face of the earth and communicate about the face of the earth. So we have maps that we have to be careful in our interpretation. We'll cover that in a video real soon. But mental maps are also very important, because a lot of times because of our familiarity with the place, maybe our neighborhood, maybe between our house and the school, maybe between our house and the grocery store or wherever else we go, we have these mental ideas of where do I want to drive? Do I want to go the back roads? Do I want to go this way or that way? And we have these ideas of safe places and off-limits places. Now, Referring to navigational maps, some of you might have seen some pictures of maps way back in history that showed maybe a certain landmass and water around that landmass and like a picture of a sea monster or something. So that mental map was, hey, we don't know what's out there, so it's probably dangerous. Let's just think it's dangerous and let's put a sea monster there so you won't even think about going there, for instance. But we probably have those ideas about places that are off limits, terra incognito, that are not part of our mental idea of where we travel and where we are allowed to or should go. And so all of these kinds of things that are probably part of our daily lives, you know, these mental maps and using GPS or using directional navigational maps in our daily lives, these things are important for us to know, are part of the general thinking geographically that we have to transition to over the course of this semester. Okay, so in the next few videos, like I said, we're going to look at maps, and we're also going to look at those themes of geography. And please take really good notes over this video. If you didn't already do it, repeat it, I suggest, and you take some notes and write down some definitions that we covered or look them up in your textbook. Because your first project in this class, it's coming up during week 3. I will assign it to you. It won't be due until like week 4, so don't freak out. But it's going to be over thinking geographically and those themes of geography and how do we interpret cultural landscapes and stuff like that. So I will see you again real soon. Study hard.